Hey, everybody, it's Lauren Delisa Coleman with another interview from the Harlem International Film Festival. And I have with me now a filmmaker whose name is Dave Davidson. And he has it's just a killer documentary at the festival. It's called Cinema and Sanctuary. You guys are going to love this, not only because you're lovers of and participants in the film industry, but also because it just is, I don't know. I mean, who knew that this had ever happened? So wait till you hear all about this. Dave, thank you so much for joining us with your wonderful dogs in the back. Hopefully they'll come back again so that everybody can see them. But yes, thank you for joining us in your beautiful breezy home there. Tell us, please, a synopsis, or rather give us a synopsis or summary of this film and the full film title, please.
Sure. The title is, in toto, Cinema and Sanctuary, Hans Richter and America's First Documentary Film School. And it really fills in the gap in this, the story of not only film education, but film history in general. I mean, you can't go to a film festival anymore without documentaries kind of springing out of everywhere. Documentaries now really dominate the broadcast and cable and streaming universe. And very few questions are kind of asked about, what are the origins of these things? And, now we're a few generations into folks who are professional filmmakers who came out of film school. Well, what was the first origin? What was the first school that actually taught documentary? And, there's a mythology about, film schools are either, high roller East Coast schools or come out of the Hollywood tradition. And it turns out that the first documentary film school was, in fact, in a tuition-free public university in New York City called the Film Institute at the City College of New York. And it was way ahead of the curve. It was formed in 1941.
When I saw this about the film, I was shocked, right? Because first of all, I didn't even think about a documentary film school, and certainly that it would not have come out of those origins, but who ran it was even more interesting. So get into that part, please.
That was the major magnet that made me convinced that the story had to be told, because at City College, you had kids really from the 5 boroughs of New York who couldn't afford to go to college, but who tested in. But they were mostly in the sciences and engineering and things like that. But because of World War II, the government saw a real need to create informational and documentary films, really to push back against Nazi propaganda. And ironically, the guy who ended up running it was, in fact, a European expat, radical thinker, DADAist, and pioneering experimental filmmaker by the name of Hans Richter. And he literally landed in New York after he escaped from the Nazis who were about to arrest him in Switzerland. And within months, he was teaching at the Institute, and then went on within the first year to become its director. And the whole idea of the alchemy, thank you, Kiko, the alchemy of what happens when you put this aristocratic German iconic filmmaker / artist in the same room with a bunch of, working class kids from New York. It's like, how is this even happening? And what happened was a lot of magic, because these kids, although they were raised on Hollywood filmmaking, were hungry to make films. And their parents may have disapproved of the idea of them actually majoring in film, because there was no such thing. They took to it. Hans Richter took to them, and so began the origins of documentary film teaching at the college level. And Richter was a world-renowned figure. So he was a magnet for people like John Grierson, even Robert Flaherty, the guy who did Nanook of the North. He knew all these guys, and they were willing to come in and teach classes. So it was this unique point in history where a really unlikely group of hungry to learn kids were exposed to the greatest minds in documentary.
Crazy. So how did you find out about this, though?
Well, full disclosure, I was a Hans Richter fan ever since I was an undergraduate at the University of Illinois, in the 70s, because then independent film was becoming a big deal, underground filmmaking. So I was exposed to Richter's 1920s avant-garde films with flying bowler hats and all kinds of weird psychedelia. And so I just said, wow, there's a whole different kind of filmmaking that I don't know about. He also happened to make documentaries at that time, which put him in line to, take over the Institute. However, fast forward in my own history I moved to New York, went to grad school, and ended up teaching at the very same institution where Richter taught, which is City College of New York. So once I found out he taught at the Institute, which I had no clue about all these years, I really felt like I was on sacred ground. And then doing some math, because the place, he was only there till 1957, and it kind of struggled on without him for a few years. But I thought, you know what? Richter passed away 1976. Most of the faculty had passed, but I bet there are students out there who remember this place, because it's literally, there was one file card in the City College archives that just said Film Institute 1941 to 1964. Nothing.
That's it.
That's it.
Crazy. So you really had to recreate all of this, from dust almost.
Well, yeah, because I was a Richter fan first, I started doing oral histories in the early 2000s with graduates, and I found that the range was insane. Jonas Mekas, who's really one of the founders of the American experimental film movement, all the way up to Oscar winners like Alan Hyam, who won Best Editing for All That Jazz. This cross-section of people, and wonderful documentarians as well, who came through this place. I realized early on that there was really not a definitive documentary about Hans Richter. So I took like a 10-year detour to go ahead and do a biopic on him, finish that, and then I had a lot of material that I could draw from. Meanwhile, met a lot more graduates of the Institute. And finally, I couldn't stand it anymore. I had to just do the film that I set out to make in the first place. So in around 2015, I started picking up the pieces. So I actually had a lot of the stuff. It was just a matter of assembling it. And thank goodness, because in the interim, from the early 2000s to 2015, so even some of the graduates of the Institute had passed.
Right. So, it's just really fascinating. And on so many levels, the coincidences of you teaching there at the same place he did, but then also, being able to kind of maintain that passion for the project for that long. Was there ever any doubt in your mind that okay, this may or may not happen? Or, if you had to kind of rev yourself back up again at certain points? And if so, how did you do that?
At one point, it definitely, Cinema and Sanctuary was on the shelf. I thought, I'm doing the biopic. There's 5 minutes in a 1 hour piece on Richter about the Institute, but I never felt like the story was completely told. So I guess it was always in the back of my mind, but never really had a strategy to do it. But I actually retired from City College last year. And as that point approached, I thought, you know what? Richter always collaborated with his students when he was teaching. They would work on his avant-garde films, et cetera, et cetera. So I thought, well, wouldn't it be cool if we could sort of mirror that process? So I gathered some graduate students around and began working with them and sharing the material with them, just as Richter had done many, many years before. And kind of we modeled that. And it was great. And because I didn't put them on as coffee runners, I put them on in really important roles. They were empowered to be part of the filmmaking process. And then in some of the key positions like DP, editor, I actually was able to reach out to graduates who moved on into the industry. So it was really a family affair. And, we benefited greatly from that. But that was the push. It's like, I really don't want to leave town without telling this story and sort of leaving it as a little goodbye Valentine to City College as well.
Just really, really fascinating. What did you learn, Dave, about this most, either about yourself or the filmmaking process or what have you, once you brought, this wonderful cohort together, current and, graduate students?
Well, I think, on one hand, it really just went to sort of reinforce that cliche that all filmmakers, especially independent, just keep making the same film over and over again. And so it's like this one never left me. And, I actually did a third project that was related to Richter. So this is the end of a trilogy. And the learning process is that there are just so many different doors to different rooms that you can open and keep learning more, and go with the inspiration of an incredible role model like Richter, who himself in his own life kept creating, kept collaborating, worked across all these different media. I mean, he was a sculptor, he was a painter, he was a filmmaker, and that kind of interesting sort of inspirational time travel is so powerful when it comes down through the generations. And I felt, the learning was, I kind of learned from him, and then I passed it on to another generation. So it's just really humbling to be part of that continuity.
I love that. And I love how you used, or rather worked with current students and alums and yourself, just a really interesting, kind of mix. So in looking at the film, though, just watching the film, as many will during the festival, what do you hope that people take away from it?
I think especially in the age of this sort of collective attention deficit disorder, where nobody stays with anything for more than a few seconds and then moves on to the next, that with a piece like this, they'll take a deep breath, sit down, and learn from that amazing continuity of new thought that a person like Richter and a place like the Institute of Film Techniques, which just blazed trails. There was no documentary film school. Those kinds of things represent, and that we can connect to that legacy and learn from it, and just sit down, relax, look at some of these classic films that Richter made, look at some of the things that people who were at the Institute made, and understand that we're part of an ongoing process, and that we don't need to be distracted just by the latest piece of eye candy. Experiment, push boundaries, but you're not reinventing the wheel. There's plenty that we can draw forward from that.
I think that is some very wise advice. And I only felt that maybe most recently. I was in November doing this series at the Rome Independent Film Festival, which was wonderful. And I had the opportunity to go to the Coliseum for the first time. And standing inside of it, I just, had a moment to kind of slow down, massively slow down, to where, you're thinking, wow, this was constructed or began construction just 75 years after Christ, and it's still mostly here, and you're part of a continuum. And it's just really, when that hits you, you're kind of just I don't know, kind of stunned and humbled and excited and everything all at the same time. And it's really just a blessing to be able to experience that, even if it's only fleeting. So if this film can do something like that as well, especially for those of you guys watching who love film, that's all the better. So tell me about Harlem International Film Festival. You've lived in the city, I would say, almost all of your life. Have you ever attended, or, what are kind of your hopes for the film at the festival? Just what do you think about it overall?
Well, it's an interesting thing. For all the years I spent in Harlem, one of my dedications was to be able to, continue that tradition of bringing, immigrants, people of color, people who never had access to the tools of filmmaking, and especially in the digital age. Now things are accessible, but that doesn't mean people have the skills to use them. So it was that group. It was the people from Harlem, people from the outer boroughs, people from the New York City public school system, who were kind of marginalized off of these elites who were making the films and telling the stories. I wanted to be part of the engine to put those tools into their hands, and being located at City College in Harlem was a huge part of that. And seeing something like the Harlem Film Festival be founded and grow and blossom is really just gratifying and humbling to see that going on around Harlem, which has always been a cultural hub. It's just like who's getting the message, who's listening, and it just seems like such a wonderful thing. And I'm delighted that I'm this film and me. I mean, I'm a minority there, which is awesome. It's like great stuff. So it's very empowering.
Very, very cool. So let's see, how can we keep up with whatever your next kind of adventures in the creative space will be, or certainly following more about, this film as it may go on to other things, other festivals, other opportunities, and so much more? Do you have a site? Are you active on social, et cetera?
Well, as a matter of fact, your question is really timely, because we're going to be in a couple of more New York festivals next week. We're going to be in Montreal, and we've been in several around the world. But everything happens so fast. It's like by the time I send out an email blast or post it, it's over. But I will gladly share that information. We do have a website. I have a not-for-profit production company called Hudson West Productions. So Hudson West, Hudson like the river, Hudson West like the direction, .org. If you Google that, we'll have updates about the film and all the other productions we've done. We've been doing this for like 37 years. So
wow, it's great. Great. Well, I just can't help but notice, and this doesn't really have to do with you, the film, but you just have such a beautiful French door, what have you, in the back, blowing back and forth. You aren't in Manhattan with this.
We are not in Manhattan anymore. We started in Manhattan. We actually, became rent fugitives pretty early on. We moved to Hoboken when it was just the home of Frank Sinatra and a bunch of dive bars. And now I've actually escaped to Connecticut. Now I'm just a New York State tax refugee. So we've got a little land. We keep collecting dogs, and but I'm very much in touch with Manhattan, and keep my eye on everything and get down there when I can.
Well, that's great. Even as a refugee, seems like you're making out okay.
Doing all right. Thank you.
Anything else you'd like to add before we finish up, Dave?
No, I hope that the online, even though the online aspect of these festivals is something that a lot of people really mourn, because we all miss that expanded experience, the communal experience of watching films. And I must say this one really looks great on the big screen. I just hope that the online aspect does allow our outreach to be expanded, and we can get to some people who might not ordinarily be able to get to the festival, and start that conversation about another sort of hidden gem in the Harlem culture.
Absolutely. And just to know all about this. And a lot of times when you are, I guess, aware of certain origins, it just gives you a different perspective, or expands one's perspective. So I think that is what this film can do for sure.
Just walking through that space and breathing that air. You can walk through the campus of City College and feel a little bit like you felt passing by the Coliseum. There's something there.
For sure. For sure. All right. Well, thank you so much, Dave. And you guys, thank you so much for watching. Do try and catch Dave's wonderful documentary, Cinema and Sanctuary. We will be bringing you even more interviews for the Harlem Film Festival. I am Lauren DeLisa Coleman for the Inside series right here at Filmio.